God's intentions towards that person is so tremendous. Even still, He wants to do far more than that person thinks. He wants to do far more than we think. I think it's possible, it's even likely that you and I probably have expectations of God that are lower than what He's willing to do, how He's willing to interact with us. What if your thoughts about God's thoughts about you are not accurate? I'll say it again. What if your thoughts about God's thoughts about you are not accurate? They're not right. You know, a lot of us just go through life and assume that what we think about God and what we think God thinks about us is correct. We just, But actually, often it's wrong. And sometimes it's very wrong. So we have these thoughts about God and what He's like, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're true. He could actually be very different than what we think about Him. And that's a little bit of a wrestle, right? Because if you want to respect God and revere God, and right, it's tough to be like, well, what if my thoughts about God are not correct? It feels like you're almost betraying God when actually what you're doing is you've been believing in a false God, or at least a not full picture of who God is and what He's like. Because if what you think about Him is not correct, that's a false God. That makes sense? That's hard to let go of, though, because you're like, well, I want to be respectful. I want to respect God. But in this situation, David's like, God, why would you think of me? This doesn't quite add up. And I just kind of wonder how many of us are in a place where we're in this moment right here, right now. Maybe we need to open ourselves up to the likelihood that maybe we've been wrong about the level of God's care and thoughts and concern about us, that maybe it's greater than we think, no matter how great we think it is. So I'm a Christmas movie fan. Any Christmas movie fans in here? Do you guys start it in right after Thanksgiving and been rolling since, some of you? Yeah? That's what we do. One of my favorite Christmas movies is Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase. There's crude moments that didn't need to be in there, but nonetheless, Chevy's a funny comedian, and there's a scene where Chevy Chase is his character Clark Griswold. He's shopping with his cousin Eddie, and him and cousin Eddie are having conversations. And cousin Eddie, there on the left, we learn that cousin Eddie says that his life has gotten hard for him. He's lost his job. He's lost the house. Him and his wife are living in the RV that they pulled up in. If you know the movie, it's not the best RV. And not only that, but they don't have any money for the kids for Christmas. And so they can't buy them any presents. Well, they're out shopping, and Eddie's just, letting Clark know about all these things. And then Clark says, hey, wife and I, we'd really like to do something nice for you guys this year. We'd like to buy your kids Christmas presents this year and take care of it. And, upon hearing that, cousin Eddie, he says to Clark, well, Clark, this is a surprise. This is just a real nice surprise. A real nice surprise. And he gives Clark a huge hug. And then right after he gives Clark a huge hug, he pauses for just a moment. And then he pulls out a list. And he says, well, here's a list, alphabetical, starting with Catherine. And then basically he's got a whole list set up for the kids, for all the kids, for his whole family. And then he says, Clark, and after you get all those things, I'd like to get something nice for you, something real nice, right? So apparently cousin Eddie was not surprised that Clark offered to buy his kids presents. He knew full well that Clark would probably offer because he had a list waiting to give to him of all the presents that they'd like to buy for the kids. Cousin Eddie, he's a character. Cousin Eddie might not have been surprised by Clark Griswold's generosity, but the scriptures are clear that Jesus shares stories about people who are surprised by generosity and kindness, and how people sometimes have the wrong expectations of others, including of God himself. One of the best stories that Jesus ever showed, one of the most enduring stories that people know so well, is the prodigal son story. And I think in time that the name of that story is going to get changed. I really do. I think whether it's 20, 50 years from now, people are going to call it the prodigal sons as opposed to the prodigal son. Because people's understanding of the story is changing with time and realizing there wasn't just one son who was far from his father, there was two sons who were far from dad. So the story goes like this. There's a father who had two sons, and one day the younger son asked his father if he could have his inheritance, that he wanted to get what was coming to him and head on out. And of course, as it would be today, essentially, it's as good as saying, Dad, I wish you were dead. I want my portion of the inheritance that will come to me when you die. So Dad gives him the portion of the inheritance that would have been coming to him when Dad died, and the son heads out. And of course, the story goes that he wastes it all, right? He blows it all in partying, sinful lifestyles, foolish decisions, and he comes to the place where the money's gone, the friends are gone, and he's working for a pig farmer. Of course, it's kind of rubbing it in that culture because Jewish people, right, pigs were unclean, and so Jesus is really driving the story home that he's in a bad situation. And so he's looking at the pig farmer, the pig's food, and he's so hungry, he's like, oh, that actually is starting to look good. Like that's how hungry he was. But then he comes to himself and he realizes, wait a minute, what am I doing? My servants back at Dad's place are doing better than this. Like, even if I was just a servant at Dad's house, that would be far better. So at that point, he begins to head back home. Luke chapter 15 tells us that, so the son, he returned home to his father. His game plan is, I'm going to be a servant. I'm not worthy to be a son anymore, but I can at least be a servant. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, and he embraced him, and he kissed him. And his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. So he's right. He's doing what he thinks he needs to do here to become a servant for his dad. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring and put it on his finger, sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but he is now found. So the party began. And when I read this story, I think, wait a minute, what just happened? What just happened? This younger son of the father, he had thoughts and expectations of his dad that were what? They were far lower than what his dad was actually willing to do. He was thinking, I'm clearly not worthy to be a son anymore. I've blown it with my dad. However, if I can just be a servant, I'll be in a lot better position. Dad, if he can just take me back. His hope was, at best, Dad will reluctantly take me back to be a servant. I've made a fool of him. I've dishonored the family name. All of these things, but maybe I can be a servant. But his dad's heart, desire, what he wanted for his son was totally different. It was way higher and better than what his son expected. He thought, if I can just be a servant, and Dad was like, if he can just become home, he can be my son again. Right? I want to give him all of these things, and I want to reinstate him as my son because I love him so much. But it's important you pay attention to the expectations of the younger son, because in just a few moments we're going to see how the older son also had low expectations of his dad. Much like this man who was down on his luck, sitting across from our parking lot, his expectations of what I was willing to do for him was lower than what I actually did for him. All small kindnesses that I did, right? But even still, His expectations were low. So before we get to the older brother, why did Jesus even tell this story? Well, we're told in the first couple of verses of Luke chapter 15 that Jesus told this particular story because there were religious people of his day who were giving him a hard time about the fact that he was hanging out with sinful people. Some of the notorious sinners of his day, Jesus' day, were tax collectors. Tax collectors took money from their own people, the Jewish people, and they gave it to their kind of mortal enemies, the Romans. Kind of like the son stabbed his dad in the back, you know. That's what these tax collectors are doing. They're stabbing their own people in the back, their own family in the back, taking from their own people and giving to the Romans who were occupying and ruling over them. I mean, like, that's just kind of the lowest of the low in their culture. Well, Jesus is hanging out with the tax collectors. He's hanging out with other, people that are in these classes of the most sinful. He's eating with them. He's teaching them. He's interacting with them in various ways, forgiving, many of them who come in for forgiveness, all kinds of things, healing them. And there's a religious crowd who is not happy with that at all, that Jesus is doing this. And so Jesus tells this story. First of all, he wants people to know that, hey, these tax collectors, these people that are worst of the worst, God's loving intentions towards them is better than you think. God actually has far more that he wants to do for them than you think he will do for them. He will do great things for them. He wants to do great things for them. His love for them is tremendous. And the younger son illustrates that in the story. That no matter how sinful, how broken, how whatever, God's intentions towards that person is so tremendous. Even still, he wants to do far more than that person thinks. He wants to do far more than we think.